week. I don't know what week. Week somewhere between the beginning and the end.
You're a little fuzzy.
Well, welcome y'all to Wizard of Earthsea. Is that better?
Awesome.
Good. I like it when people are pleased. Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Guinn. Some of you may remember we started back on chapter 1, titled Warriors in the Mist, where we met our young hero, Ged, a boy of some wizardly inclination, who saved his village from marauders, quite unexpectedly, unexpected by everyone, including himself, I think. Went to live with the premier
So should I stop this?
wizard of Gaunt, the island that he was born on. As he was living and learning some things from that wizard, Ogion, he got a little cocky, wanted to show off for a young lady, and read a spell from a book that perhaps he shouldn't have been reading, and released a shadow, which Ogion made go away. And then Ogion said, maybe you don't really want to be here, because I'm kind of chill and mellow, and you're a bit of a hothead, aren't you? And Ged said, yeah, I'm a wicked freaking hothead. Send me to that school for wizards where I can learn to be an awesome wizard, not some boring little quiet person like you, Ogion. So off he went to the island of Roke and the School of Wizardry, where many things were learned. He continued to be a bit of a cocky bastard, getting into it with Jasper, one of the other students, making good friends with Vetch, one of the students. And Jasper was kind of goading him one night after a big revel, and he called up a shade from the lands of beyond, someone long dead, and with it came the shadow, presumably the same shadow from back in Ogion's house on Gaunt. But this time, bad things happened. Shadow attacked Ged. Ged got injured. Archmage came, drove the shadow off. Archmage died. Nobody was real happy about that. Ged eventually gets better, continues his wizard training, goes to an island. More stuff happens, makes friends. Friend's kid dies. Ged almost gets stuck in the land of the dead. Comes back, realizes the shadow, meets the shadow in the land of the dead, comes back to the island. It's like, can't really be chilling here anymore. This shadow is going to come get me, and that's not going to go well for the people of this island. I'm just protecting from a dragon. Can't really protect them from a dragon if the shadow eats me. Maybe the shadow will eat them too. That would be like double bad. Ged doesn't like double bad, and he says, hey, maybe you should let me go take care of that dragon for you now. Might not work out, but if it doesn't work out now, it wouldn't have worked out years from now. So let's just get this over with, right? Did I miss anything?
Perfect.
I missed perfect. I think that's part of the human condition, is missing perfect. I've come to settle for pretty okay.
I mean, I think you're pretty all right.
Aw, shucks. So, the next morning, he went down among the fishermen of the principal moorage of Low Torning, and finding the head isleman there, said to him, I must leave this place. I am in danger, and I put you in danger. I must go. Therefore, I ask your leave to go out and do away with the dragons on Pendor, so that my task for you will be finished, and I may leave freely. Or, if I fail, I should fail also when they come here. And that is better known now than later. The Isleman stared at him, all drop-jawed. Okay, sorry, distracted. Yes, Lord Sparrowhawk, he said, there are 9 dragons out there. 8 of them are still young, they say, but the old one, I tell you, I must go from here. I asked your leave to rid you of the dragon peril first, if I can do so. As you will, sir, the Isleman said gloomily. All that listened there thought this was a folly or a crazy courage in the young wizard, and with sullen faces they saw him go, expecting no news of him again. Some hinted that he meant merely to sail back by ROSC to the inmost sea, leaving them in the lurch. Others, among them Peckbury, held that he had gone mad and sought death. And it is with that cliffhanger that we left our story last week. So, picking up again. For 4 generations of men, all ships had set their course to keep far from the shores of Pendor Island. No mage had ever come to do combat with the dragon there, for the island was on no traveled sea road, and its lords had been pirates, slave takers, war makers, hated by all that dwelt in the southwest parts of Earthsea. For this reason, none had sought to revenge the lords of Pendor after the dragon came suddenly out of the west upon him and his men, where they sat feasting in the tower, and smothered them with the flames of his mouth, and drove all the townfolk screaming into the sea. Unavenged, Pendor had been left for the dragon, with all its bones and towers and jewels stolen from the long-dead princes of the coast of Palm and ROSC. All this Ged knew well, and more. For ever since he came to Low Torning, he had held in his mind and pondered over all he had ever learned of dragons. As he guided his small boat westward, not rowing now, nor using the seaman's skill Peckbury had taught him, but sailing wizardly with the mage wind in his sail and a spell set on the prow and keel to keep them true. He watched to see the dead isle rise on the rim of the sea. Speed he wanted, and therefore used the mage wind, for he feared what was behind him more than what was before him. But as the day passed, his impatience turned from fear to a kind of glad fierceness. At least he sought this danger of his own free will, and the nearer he came to it, the more sure he was that, for this time at least, for this hour perhaps before his death, he was free. The shadow dared not follow him into the dragon's jaws. The waves ran white-tipped on the gray sea, and gray clouds streamed overhead on the north wind. He went west with the quick mage wind in his sail, and came in sight of the rocks of Pendor, the still streets of the town, and the gutted falling towers. At the entrance of the harbor, a shallow crescent bay, he let the wind spell drop and stilled his little boat so it lay rocking on the waves. Then he summoned the dragon. "Usurper of Pendor, come, defend your hoard!" His voice fell short in the sound of breakers beating on the ashen shores, but dragons have keen ears. Presently one flitted up from some roofless ruin in the town like a vast black bat, thin-winged and spiny backed, and circling into the north wind came flying towards Ged. His heart swelled at the sight of the creature that was a myth to his people, and he laughed and shouted, "Go tell the old one to come, you windworm!" For this was one of the young dragons, spawned there years ago by a she-dragon from the West Reach, who had set her clutch of great leathern eggs, as they say she-dragons will, in some sunny, broken room of the tower and had flown away again, leaving the old dragon of Pendor to watch the young when they crawled like baneful lizards from the shell. The young dragon made no answer. He was not large of his kind, maybe the length of a 40-oared ship, and was worm-thin for all the reach of his black membranous wings. He had not got his growth yet, nor his voice, nor any dragon cunning. Straight at Ged in the small rocking boat he came, opening his long, toothed jaws as he slid down arrowy from the air, so that all Ged had to do was bind his wings and limbs stiff with one sharp spell and send him thus hurtling aside into the sea like a stone falling, and the gray sea closed over him. Two dragons, like the first, rose up from the base of the highest tower, even as the first one came driving straight at Ged. So even he caught both, hurled them down, and drowned them, and he had not yet lifted up his wizard's staff. Now, after a little time, there came three against him from the island. One of these was much greater, and fire spewed curling from its jaws. Two came flying at him, rattling their wings, but the big one came circling from behind, very swift, to burn him and his boat with its breath of fire. No binding spell would catch all three, because two came from the north and one from the south. In the instant that he saw this, Ged worked a spell of changing, and between one breath and the next, flew up from his boat in dragon form. Spreading broad wings and reaching talons out, he met the two head on, withering them with fire, and then turned to the third, who was larger than he and armed also with fire. On the wind over the gray waves, they doubled, snapped, swooped, lunged, till smoke roiled about them, red lit by the glare of their fiery mouths. Ged flew suddenly upward, and the other pursued below him. In mid-flight, the dragon Ged raised wings, stopped, and stooped as the hawk stoops, talons outstretched downward, striking and bearing the other down by neck and flank. The black wings flurried, and black dragon blood dropped in thick drops onto the sea. The Pendor dragon tore free and flew low and lamely to the island, where it hid, crawling into some well or cavern in a ruined town. At once Ged took his form and place again on the boat, for it was most perilous to keep that dragon shape longer than need demanded. His hands were black with the scalding worm blood, and he was scorched about the head with fire, but this was no matter now. He waited only till he had his breath back, and then called, "6 I have seen, 5 slain, 9 are told of. Come out, worms!" No creature moved, nor voice spoke for a long while on the island, but only the waves beat loudly on the shore. Then Ged was aware that the highest tower slowly changed its shape, bulging out on one side as if it grew an arm. He feared dragon magic, for old dragons are very powerful and guileful in a sorcery like, and unlike the sorcery of men. But a moment more, and he saw this was no trick of the dragon, but of his own eyes. What he had taken for a part of the tower was the shoulder of the dragon of Pendor, as he uncurled his bulk and lifted himself slowly up. When he was all afoot, his scaled head, spiked, crowned, and triple-tongued, rose higher than the broken tower's height, and his taloned forefeet rested on the rubble of the town below. His scales were gray-black, catching the daylight like broken stone. Lean as a hound he was, and huge as a hill. Ged stared in awe. There was no song or tale could prepare the mind for this sight. Almost he stared into the dragon's eyes and was caught, for one cannot look into a dragon's eyes. He glanced away from the oily green gaze that watched him and held up before him his staff that looked now like a splinter, like a twig. 8 sons I had, little wizard, said the great dry voice of the dragon. 5 died. 1 dies. Enough! You will not win my hoard by killing them. I do not want your hoard. The yellow smoke hissed from the dragon's nostrils. This was his laughter. Would you not like to come ashore and look at it, little wizard? It is worth looking at. No, dragon. The kinship of dragons is with wind and fire, and they do not fight willingly over the sea. That had been Ged's advantage so far, and he kept it, but the strip of seawater between him and the great gray talons did not seem much of an advantage anymore. It was hard not to look into the green, watching eyes. You are a very young wizard, the dragon said. I did not know men came so young into their power. He spoke, as did Ged, in the old speech, for that is the tongue of dragons still. Although the use of old speak binds a man to truth, this is not so with dragons. It is their own language, and they can lie in it, twisting the true words to false ends, catching the unwary hearer in a maze of mirror words, each of which reflects the truth and none of which leads anywhere. So Ged had been warned often, and when the dragon spoke, he listened with an untrustful ear, all his doubts ready. But the words seemed plain and clear. Is it to ask my help that you have come here, little wizard? No, dragon. Yet I could help you. You will need help soon against that which hunts you in the dark. Ged stood dumb. What is it that hunts you? Name it to me. If I could name it. Ged stopped himself. Yellow smoke curled above the dragon's long head from the nostrils that were 2 round pits of fire. If you could name it, you could master it, maybe, little wizard. Maybe I could tell you its name when I see it close by. And it will come close if you wait about my isle. It will come wherever you come. It will come wherever you come. If you do not want it to come close, you must run and keep running from it. And yet it will follow you. Would you like to know its name? Ged stood silent again. How the dragon knew of the shadow he had loosed, he could not guess, nor how it might know the shadow's name. The archmage had said that the shadow had no name, yet dragons have their own wisdom, and they are an older race than man. Few men can guess what a dragon knows and how he knows it, and those few are the dragon lords. To Ged, only one thing was sure, that though the dragon might well be speaking truth, though he might indeed be able to tell Ged the nature and the name of the shadow thing, and so give him power over it, even so, if he spoke truth, he did so wholly for his own ends. It is very seldom, the young man said at last, that dragons ask to do men favors. But it is very common, said the dragon, for cats to play with mice before they kill them. But I did not come here to play or to be played with. I came to strike a bargain with you. Like a sword in sharpness, but 5 times the length of any sword, the point of the dragon's tail arched up scorpion-wise over his mailed back above the tower. Dryly he spoke. I strike no bargains. I take. What have you to offer? that I cannot take from you when I like. Safety, your safety. Swear that you will never fly eastward of Pendor, and I will swear to leave you unharmed. A grating sound came from the dragon's throat, like the noise of an avalanche far off, stones falling among mountains. Fire danced along his three-forked tongue. He raised himself up higher, looking over the ruins. You offer me safety? You threaten me? With what? With your name, Evod. Ged's voice shook as he spoke the name, yet he spoke it clear and loud. At the sound of it, the old dragon held still, utterly still. A minute went by, and another, and then Ged, standing there in his rocking chip of a boat, smiled. He had staked this venture and his life on a guess drawn from old histories of dragon lore learned on Roke, a guess that this dragon of Pendor was the same that had spoiled the west of Oskill in the days of Elfran and Mored, and had been driven from Oskill by a wizard, Elt, wise in names. The guess had held. We are matched, Evod. You have the strength, I have your name. Will you bargain? Still, the dragon made no reply. Many years had the dragon sprawled on the island where golden breastplates and emeralds lay scattered among dust and bricks and bones. He had watched his black lizard brood play among crumbling houses and try their wings from the cliffs. He had slept long in the sun, unwaked by voice or sail. He had grown old. It was hard now to stir, to face this mage lad, this frail enemy, at the sight of whose staff Evod, the old dragon, winced. You may choose 9 stones from my hoard, he said at last, his voice hissing and whining in his long jaws. The best. Take your choice, then go. I do not want your stones, Evod. Where is men's greed gone? Men loved bright stones in the old days in the north. I know what it is you want, wizard. I too can offer you safety, for I know what can save you. I know what alone can save you. There is a horror follows you. I will tell you its name. Ged's heart leapt in him, and he clutched his staff, standing as still as the dragon stood. He fought a moment with sudden, startling hope. It was not his own life that he bargained for. One mastery, and only one, could he hold over the dragon. He set hope aside and did what he must do. That is not what I ask for, Evod. When he spoke the dragon's name, it was as if he held the huge being on a fine, thin leash, tightening it on his throat. He could feel the ancient malice and experience of men in the dragon's gaze that rested on him. He could see the steel talons, each as long as a man's forearm, and the stone-hard hide, and the withering fire that lurked in the dragon's throat. And yet always the leash tightened. He spoke again. Evod, swear by your name that you and your sons will never come to the archipelago. Flames broke suddenly bright and loud from the dragon's jaws, and he said, I swear it by my name. Silence lay over the isle then, and Evod lowered his great head. When he raised it again and looked, the wizard was gone, and the sail of his boat was a white fleck on the waves eastward, heading towards the jeweled islands of the inner seas. Then, in rage, the old dragon of Pendor rose up, breaking the tower with the writhing of his body and beating his wings that spanned the whole width of the ruined town. But his oath held him, and he did not fly, then or ever to the archipelago. Chapter 6, Hunted. As soon as Pendor had sunk under the sea rim behind him, Ged looking eastward, felt the fear of the shadow coming to his heart again, and it was hard to turn from the bright danger of dragons to that formless, hopeless horror. He let the mage wind drop and sailed on with the world's wind, for there was no desire for speed in him now. He had no clear plan even of what he should do. He must run, as the dragon had said, but where? To Roke, he thought, since there at least he was protected and might find counsel among the wise. First, however, he must come to Low Torning once more and tell his tale to the Islemen. When word went out that he had returned 5 days from his setting forth, they and half the people of the township came rowing and running to gather round him and stare at him and listen. He told his tale, and one man said, "But who saw this wonder of dragons slain and dragons baffled? What if he—" "Be still," the headman said roughly, for he knew, as did most of them, that a wizard may have subtle ways of telling the truth, and may keep the truth to himself, but that if he says a thing, the thing is as he says, for that is his master. So they wondered, and began to feel that their fear was lifted from them, and they began to rejoice. They pressed round the young wizard and asked for the tale again. More islanders came and asked for it again. By nightfall, he no longer had to tell it. They could do it for him, better. Already the village chanters had fitted it to an old tune and were singing the Song of Sparrowhawk. Bonfires were burning not only on the isles of Low Torning, but in townships to the south and east. Fishermen shouted the news from boat to boat. From isle to isle it went. Evil is averted. The dragons will never come from Pendor. That night, that one night, was joyous for Ged. No shadow could come near him through the brightness of those fires of thanksgiving that burned on every hill and beach, through the circles of laughing dancers that ringed him about, singing his praise, swinging their torches in the gusty autumn winds, so that sparks rose thick and bright and brief upon the wind. The next day he met with Peckvery, who said, "I did not know you were so mighty, my lord." There was fear in that, because he had dared to make Ged his friend, and there was reproach in it also. Ged had not saved a little child, though he had slain dragons. After that, Ged felt afresh the unease and impatience that had driven him to Pendor, and drove him now from Low Torning. The next day, though they would have gladly kept him the rest of his life to praise and boast of, he left the house on the hill with no baggage but his books, his staff, and the otak riding on his shoulder. He went in a rowboat with a couple of young fishermen of Low Torning, who wanted the honor of being his boatmen. Always, as they rowed on among the craft that crowd the eastern channels of the 90 Isles, under the windows and balconies of houses that lean out over the water, past the wharves of Nesh, the rainy pastures of Dromgon, and the malodorous oil sheds of Gaith, word of his deed had gone ahead of him. They whistled the Song of Sparrowhawk as he went by. They vied to have him spend the night and tell his dragon tale. When at last he came to Surd, the ship's master, of whom he asked passage out to Roke, bowed as he answered, "A privilege to me, Lord Wizard, and an honor to my ship." So Ged turned his back on the 90 Isles, and even as the ship turned from Surd inner port and raised sail, a wind came up hard from the east against her. It was strange, for the wintry sky was clear, and the weather had settled mild that morning. It was only 30 miles from Surd to Roke, and they sailed on. And when the wind still rose, they still sailed on. The little ship, like most traders of the inmost sea, bore the high fore and aft sail that can be turned to catch a headwind, and her master was a handy seaman, proud of his skill. So, tacking now north, now south, they worked eastward. Clouds and rain came up on the wind, which veered and gusted so wildly that there was considerable danger of the ship jibing. Lord Sparrowhawk, said the ship's master to the young man, whom he had beside him in the place of honor in the stern, though small dignity could be kept up under that wind and rain that wet them all to a miserable sleekness in their sodden cloaks. Lord Sparrowhawk, might you say a word to this wind, maybe? How near are we to Roke? Better than halfway, but we've made no headway at all this past hour, sir. Ged spoke to the wind. It blew less hard, and for a while they went on fairly enough. Then sudden great gusts came whistling out of the south, and meeting these, they were driven back westward again. The clouds broke and boiled in the sky, and the ship's master roared out ragefully, "This fool's gale blows all ways at once. Only a mage wind will get us through this weather, Lord." Ged looked glum at that, but the ship and her men were in danger for him, so he raised up the mage wind into her sail. At once the ship began to cleave straight to the east, and the ship's master began to look cheerful again. But little by little, though Ged kept up the spell, the mage wind slackened, growing feebler until the ship seemed to hang still on the waves for a minute, her sail drooping among all the tumult of the rain and gale. Then, with a thunder crack, the boom came swinging round, and she jibed and jumped northward like a scared cat. Ged grabbed hold of a stanchion, for she lay almost over on her side, and shouted, "Turn back to Surd, master!" The master cursed and shouted that he would not. "A wizard aboard, and I the best seaman of the trade, and this the handiest ship I have ever sailed? Turn back?" Then the ship turning again, almost as if a whirlpool had caught her keel, he too grabbed hold of the sternpost to keep aboard, and Ged said to him, "Leave me at Surd and sail where you like. It's not against your ship this wind blows, but against me." "Against you, a wizard of Roke? Have you never heard of the Roke wind, master?" "Aye, that keeps off evil powers from the Isle of the Wise. But what has that to do with you, a dragon tamer?" "That is between me and my shadow," Ged answered shortly, as a wizard will, and he said no more as they went swiftly, with a steady wind under clearing skies, back over the sea to Surd. There was a heaviness and a dread in his heart as he went up from the wharves of Surd. The days were shortening into winter, and dusk came soon. With dusk, Ged's uneasiness always grew, and now the turning of each street seemed a threat to him, and he had to steel himself not to keep looking back over his shoulder at what might be coming behind him. He went to the sea house of Surd, where travelers and merchants ate together of good fare provided by the township, and might sleep in the long raftered hall. Such was the hospitality of the thriving islands of the inmost sea. He saved a bit of meat from his dinner, and by the fire pit afterward, he coaxed the otok out of the fold. "Oh, goodness. Oh, excuse me. Pardon me." and by the fire pit afterward he coaxed the otok out of the fold of his hood where it had cowered all that day. He tried to get it to eat, petting it and whispering to it, "Hoeg, Hoeg, little one, silent one," but it would not eat and crept into his pocket to hide. By that, by his own dull uncertainty, by the very look of the darkness in the corners of the great room, he knew that the shadow was not far from him. No one in this place knew him. They were travelers from other isles who had not heard the song of the sparrowhawk. None spoke to him. He chose a pallet at last and lay down, but all night long he lay with open eyes there in the raftered hall among the sleep of strangers. All night he tried to choose his way, to plan where he should go, what he should do, but each choice, each plan was blocked by a foreboding of doom. Across each way he might go lay the shadow. Only Roke was clear of it, and to Roke he could not go, forbidden by the high and woven ancient spells that kept the perilous island safe. That the Roke wind had risen against him was proof the thing that hunted him must be very close upon him now. That thing was bodiless, blind to sunlight, a creature of a lightless, placeless, timeless realm. It must grope after him through the days and across the seas of the sunlit world, and could take visible shape only in dream and darkness. It had as yet no substance or being in that the light of the sun would shine on, and so it is sung in the deed of Hode. Daybreak makes all earth and sea, from shadow brings forth form, driving dream into the dark kingdom. But if once the shadow caught up with Ged, it could draw his power out of him and take from him the very weight and warmth of life, the very weight and warmth and life of his body, and the will that moved him. That was the doom he saw lying ahead on every road, and he knew that he might be tricked toward that doom, for the shadow, going stronger always as it was nearer to him, might even now have strength enough to put evil powers or evil men to its own use, showing him false portents or speaking with a stranger's voice. For all he knew, in one of these men who slept in this corner or that of the raftered hall of the sea house tonight, the dark thing lurked, finding a foothold in a dark soul, and there waiting and watching Ged, and feeding even now on his weakness, on his uncertainty, on his fear. It was past bearing. He must trust to chance and run wherever chance took him. At the first cold hit of dawn, he got up and went in haste under the dimming stars down to the wharves of Serve, resolved only to take the first ship outward bound that would have him. A galley was loading turbot oil. She was to sail at sunrise, bound for Havnor Greatport. Ged asked passage of her master. A wizard's staff is passport and payment on most ships. They took him aboard willingly, and with that hour the ship set forth. Ged's spirits lifted with the first lifting of the 40 long oars, and the drumbeat that kept the stroke made a brave music to him. And yet he did not know what he would do in Havnor, or where he would run from there. Northward was as good as any direction. He was a northerner himself. Maybe he would find some ship to take him on to Gaunt from Havnor, and he might see Ogion again. Or he might find some ship going far out into the reaches, so far the shadow would lose him and give up the hunt. Beyond such vague ideas as these, there was no plan in his head, and he saw no one course that he must follow. Only he must run. Those 40 oars carried the ship over 150 miles of wintry sea, before sunset of the second day out from Surd. They came into port at Oremy on the east shore of the great land ROSC. For these trade galleys of the inmost sea keep to the coasts and lie overnight in harbor whenever they can. Ged went ashore, for it was still daylight, and he roamed the steep streets of the port town, aimless and brooding. Oremy is an old town, built heavily of stone and brick, walled against the lawless lords of the interior of ROSC Island. The warehouses on the docks are like forts, and the merchants' houses are towered and fortified. Yet to Ged, wandering through the streets, those ponderous mansions seemed like veils, beyond which lay an empty dark, and people who passed him, intent on their business, seemed not real men, but voiceless shadows of men. As the sun set, he came down to the wharves again, and even there in the broad red light and the wind of the day's end, the sea and land alike to him seemed dim and silent. "Where are you bound, Lord Wizard?" So one hailed him suddenly from behind. Turning, he saw a man dressed in gray, who carried a staff of heavy wood that was not a wizard's staff. The stranger's face was hidden by his hood from the red light, but Ged felt unseen eyes meet his. Starting back, he raised his own yew staff between him and the stranger. Mildly, the man asked, "What do you fear?" "What follows behind me?" "So, but I'm not your shadow." Ged stood silent. He knew that indeed this man, whatever he was not that which was not what he feared. He was no shadow or ghost or Gebeth creature. Amidst the dry silence and shadowiness that had come over the world, he even kept a voice and some solidity. He put back his hood now. He had a strange, seamed, bald head, a lined face. Though age had not sounded in his voice, he looked to be an old man. "I do not know you," said the man in gray. "Yet I think perhaps we do not meet by chance. I heard a tale once of a young man, a scarred man, who won through darkness to great dominion, even to kingship. I do not know if that is your tale, but I will tell you this. Go to the court of the Terranon if you need a sword to fight shadows with. A staff of yew wood will not serve your need." Hope and mistrust struggled in Ged's mind as he listened. A wizardly man soon learns that few indeed of his meetings are chance ones, be they for good or for ill. "In what land is the court of the Terranon?" "In Oskill." At the sound of that name, Ged saw for a moment, by a trick of memory, a black raven on green grass, who looked up at him sidelong, with an eye like polished stone, and spoke, but the words were forgotten. "That land has something of a dark name," Ged said, looking ever at the man in gray, trying to judge what kind of man he was. There was a manner about him that hinted of the sorcerer, even of the wizard, and yet boldly he spoke to Ged. There was a queer, beaten look about him, the look almost of a sick man, or a prisoner, or a slave. "You are from Roke," he answered. "The wizards of Roke give a dark name to wizardries other than their own." "What man are you?" "A traveler, a trader's agent from Oskill. I am here on business," said the man in gray. When Ged asked him no more, he quietly bade the young man good night and went up off the narrow stepped streets above the quays. Ged turned, irresolute whether to heed this sign or not, and looked to the north. The red light was dying out fast from the hills and from the windy sea. Gray dusk came, and on its heels the night. Ged went in sudden decision and haste along the quays to a fisherman who was folding his nets down in his dory, and hailed him. Do you know any ship in this port bound north to Semel or the Enlades? The longship yonders from Oskill. She might be stopping at the Enlades. In the same haste, Ged went on to the great ship the fisherman had pointed to, a longship of 60 oars, gaunt as a snake, her high bent prow carven and inlaid with discs of loto shell, her oarport covers painted red, with the rune of Siffel sketched on each in black. A grim, swift ship she looked, and all in sea trim, with all her crew aboard. Ged sought out the ship's master and asked passage to Oskill of him. Can you pay? I have some skill with wind. I am a weather worker myself. You have nothing to give? No money? In low Torning, the Islemen had paid Ged as best they could with the ivory pieces used by traders in the archipelago. He would take only 10 pieces, though they wanted to give him more. He offered these now to the Oskillian, but he shook his head. We do not use these counters. If you have nothing to pay, I have no place aboard for you. Do you need arms? I have rowed in a galley. Aye, we're short 2 men. Find your bench then, said the ship's master, and paid him no more heed. So, laying his staff and his bag of books under the rower's bench, Ged became, for 10 bitter days of winter, an oarsman of that northern ship. They left Oromie at daybreak, and that day Ged thought he could never keep up his work. His left arm was somewhat lamed by the old wounds in his shoulder, and all his rowing in the channels about Low Torning had not trained him for the relentless pull and pull and pull at the long galley oar to the beat of the drum. Each stint of the oars was of 2 or 3 hours, and then a second shift of oarsmen took the benches. But the time of rest seemed only long enough for Ged's muscles to stiffen, and then it was back to the oars. And the second day of it was worse, but after that he hardened to the labor and got on well enough. There was no such comradeship among this crew as he had found aboard the Shadow when he first went to Roke. The crewmen of Andradian and Gontish ships were partners in the trade, working together for a common profit, whereas traders of Oskill used slaves and bondsmen or hire men to row, paying them with small coins of gold. Gold is a great thing in Oskill, but it is not a source of good fellowship there or amongst the dragons, who also prize it highly. Since half this crew were bondsmen, forced to work, the ship's officers were slave masters, and harsh ones. They never laid their whips on the back of an oarsman who worked for pay or passage, but there will not be much friendliness in a crew of whom some are whipped and others are not. Ged's fellows said little to one another and less to him. They were mostly men of Oskill, speaking not the Hardic tongue of the archipelago, but a dialect of their own, and they were dour men, pale-skinned, with black drooping mustaches and lank hair. Kalub, the Red One, was Ged's name among them. Though they knew he was a wizard, they showed him no regard, but rather a kind of cautious spitefulness. And he himself was in no mood for making friends. Even on his bench, caught up in the mighty rhythm of the rowing, one oarsman among 60 in a ship racing over void gray seas, he felt himself exposed, defenseless. When they came into strange ports at nightfall, and he rolled himself in his cloak to sleep, Weary as he was, he would dream, wake, dream again, evil dreams that he could not recall waking, though they seemed to hang about the ship and the men of the ship, so that he must mistrusted each one of them. All the Oscillian freemen wore a long knife at the hip, and one day, as his oar shift shared their noon meal, one of these men asked Ged, "Are you slave or oathbreaker, Kalub?" "Neither." "Why no knife then? Afraid to fight?" said the man, Skjorth, jeering. "No." "Your little dog fight for you?" "Otok," said another who listened. "No dog. That is Otok." And he said something in Oscillian that made Skora scowl and turn away. Just as he turned, Ged saw a change in his face, a slurring and shifting of the features, as if for a moment something had changed him, used him, looking out through his eyes sidelong at Ged. Yet the next minute, Ged saw him full face, and he looked as usual, so that Ged told himself that what he had seen was his own fear, his own dread reflected in the other's eyes. But that night, as they lay in port in Essen, he dreamed, and Skjor walked in his dream. Afterwards, he avoided the man as best he could, and it seemed also that Skjor kept away from him, and no more words passed between them. The snow-crowned mountains of Havnor sank away behind them southward, blurred by the mists of early winter. They rode on past the mouth of the Sea of A, where long ago Elfran was drowned, and past the Enlades. They lay 2 days in port in Barilla, the city of ivory, white above its bay in the west of myth-haunted Enlad. At all ports they came to, the crewmen were kept aboard the ship and set no foot on land. When the red sun rose, they rowed out on the Oskill Sea into the northeast winds that blow unhindered from the islandless vastness of the North Reach. Through that bitter sea, they brought their cargo safe, coming the second day out of Barilla into port at Neshum, the trade city of eastern Oskill. Ged saw a low coast lashed by rainy wind, a gray town crouching between the long stone breakwaters that made its harbor, and behind the town, treeless hills under a snow-darkened sky. They had come far from the sunlight of the inmost sea. Longshoremen of the Sea Guild of Neshum came aboard to unload the cargo. Gold, silver, jewelry, fine silks, and southern tapestries, such precious stuff as the lords of Oskill hoard, and the freemen of the crew were dismissed. Ged stopped one of them to ask his way. Up until now, the distrust he felt of all of them kept him from saying where he was bound. But now, afoot and alone in a strange land, he must ask for guidance. The man went on impatiently, saying he did not know. But Skjor, overhearing, said, "The court of the Terranon? On the Kexamet moors? I go that road." Skjor's was no company that Ged would have chosen, but knowing neither the language nor the way, he had small choice. Nor did it much matter, he thought. He had not chosen to come here. He had been driven, and now was driven on. He pulled his hood up over his head, took up his staff and bag, and followed the Oskillian through the streets of the town and upward into the snowy hills. The little Otok would not ride on his shoulder, but hid in the pocket of his sheepskin tunic under his cloak, as was its wont in cold weather. The hills stretched out into bleak rolling moorlands as far as the eye could see. They walked in silence, and the silence of winter lay on all the land. "How far?" Ged asked after they had gone some miles. seeing no sight of village or farm in any direction, and thinking that they had no food with them. Skior turned his head for a moment, pulling up his own hood, and said, "Not far." It was an ugly face, pale, coarse, and cruel, but Ged feared no man, though he might fear where such a man would guide him. He nodded, and they went on. The road was only a scar through the waste of thin snow and leafless bushes. From time to time, other tracks crossed it or branched from it. Now that the chimney smoke of Neshum was hidden behind the hills in the darkening afternoon, there was no sign at all of what way they should go or had gone. Only the wind blew always from the east, and when they had walked for several hours, Ged thought he saw away on the hills in the northwest, where their way tended, a tiny scratch against the sky, like a tooth, white. But the light of the short day was fading, and on the next rise of the road, he could make out the thing, tower or tree or whatever, no more clearly than before. "Do we go there?" he asked, pointing. Skior made no answer, but plodded on, muffled in his coarse cloak with its peaked furred Oscillian hood. Ged strode on beside him. They had come far, and he was drowsy with the steady pace of their walking, and with the long weariness of hard days and nights in the ship. It began to seem to him that he had walked forever, and would walk forever beside this silent being through a silent, darkening land. Caution and intention were dulled in him. He walked as in a long, long dream, going no place. The otok stirred in his pocket, and a little vague fear also woke and stirred in his mind. He forced himself to speak. "Darkness comes, and snow. How far, Skior?" After a pause, the other answered without turning, "Not far." And 10 with that ominous repeated phrase, "not far." I think we will go on our ways, hopefully not far from the lighted path in the next week, and we'll come back and find out what happens to our intrepid protagonist.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the read-along song.
Mm-hmm.
Till next week.